Just popping on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April 11th Federal Communities Staff Retention and Recognition, Recruitment and Recognition Work Group. And since we don't have a ton of people going to be here, we'll see, give it a couple of minutes to find out exactly how many, to decide what we're going to do. But I'll start with an update. Last night, the ECEA hosted a virtual sip and paint, which was very well attended. I think there were close to 30 providers at the sip and paint. But the conversation was around, someone started it with, because of Teacher Appreciation Week last week, Week of the Young Child, they said, I never really recognized or saw myself as a teacher until, and I was like, what? What do you mean? So they just kept talking and I kept listening, and things were said like, the first time I got a mug with teacher on it, I realized that people saw me as a teacher, but they still didn't see themselves as a teacher. Michael, you'll appreciate this when we talk about, and then we started actually the recruitment team here at ECA started talking, and they had encountered a few applicants that had said, I'm really not comfortable with daycare. I wanted to teach. So that word daycare, teacher, even people working in the field, not seeing themselves and recognizing themselves as teachers, it is a thing. And this group actually that meets every Sunday for Sunday Fun Days, plus our committee that we have, would be a great place to kind of ask more about how they see themselves and what was the thing that made them that really understand and realize that they were a teacher. And it seemed to be more of a barrier for the infant toddler teachers than for the preschool teachers. If they are a preschool assistant in a preschool, they didn't see themselves as a teacher or recognize themselves as a teacher until something happened. And for one lady, she had a mug and she was drinking a drink out of the mug, and she goes, when I got this mug is when I realized, and I realized that they didn't see themselves as teachers. There's an assumption. So yeah, I thought that was really powerful, did not expect it. And I just wanted to kind of start off with that because I think that's super important. Anyone else for updates? Or I don't know if this is vacation week. We must be there all over the place. Sometimes it's next week. I did send forward Sara a listserv. Sunny, I should send it to you. It was someone that wrote in a listserv, and I can't remember which one, but he owns a small business and talking about a few of the restaurants that are closing on Main Street, I think in Lebanon, other businesses that are struggling staffing wise. And he called out childcare as one of the issues with that. So I thought that was pretty interesting too, that small business is not just corporate level. Businesses are struggling. It's impacting them as well. And almost, if you have 3 staff and you lose 2 permanently, that's your whole workforce practically. So it's everywhere. Just kind of call that out too.
I have a couple of things I could touch on as well, just related to what you're talking about. So first off, speaking of listservs, our initiative now has a listserv. I'm going to put a link in the chat for sign up for that. It's intended for anything that has to do with increasing access to high quality, equitable early care and education throughout the Upper Valley region. So if there's legislative calls to action, whether those are super localized, it's a town meeting or a hearing or something, or it's a statewide bill being passed, anything that affects ECE in the Upper Valley, please feel free to post it on there. And then the other thing that could be used for is for resources. It's a listserv that's open to anybody. It's open to the public. It's not closed to workgroup participants. So please feel free to share it with anybody and everybody you think would want to have this information. And it also has a calendar. So I mean, it is a listserv, so I'm just like, the technology is very like late 80s, early 90s, the look of it and stuff. However, it is a great mechanism. Lots of people use them. It's one of the Vital Communities listservs. So if you want to post a calendar event, you can just email me and I'll put it up on the calendar. And yeah, you just subscribe and you can get a digest version. So, and someone asked in one of the other work groups whether it would be appropriate for local providers to post openings. I don't see why not. That directly impacts affordable access to high quality ECE in the Upper Valley, as far as I'm concerned. So it can also be used for that purpose as well. And then I just wanted to jump in, Amy, on kind of the flavor of what you're talking about here with identity and recruitment and retention. That one of the other projects that I work on is advancing a holistic approach to education. And we're teaching a couple of classes to a whole bunch of early childhood educators right now. They're all over the state of Vermont. I think they're all Vermonters. So it's not specific to the Upper Valley, but one of the things that really struck me, we just had our first class last week. And I think that most of the providers in that first class, I think most of them are registered home providers, but some of them are center directors or center-based staff. And I was really struck by I'm going to use the word acrimony, from super stressed out teachers and care providers between them and parents. And I'm just, I'm not that was like the first time I've ever encountered it. I mean, that's a thing. And unfortunately it continues into public school and gets really ugly there, can. It's the teacher's fault, it's the parents' fault, and they just go back and forth. But, there was a lot of super judgmental comments being made about parents and parenting, based on their real concern for the kids they're working with, who are struggling hard and to feel safe and therefore behave, properly. And so I want to just put that into this conversation, because I think that as a community-based initiative, that's a dynamic that could bear some attention. And especially when we're talking about burnout, and sort of asking the community for help, for recognition, for, just thinking, Amy, like that, for that person to be like, oh, you think I'm a teacher? Like, you're conferring that respect to me, that dignity to me, and how much that does. And how corrosive it can be when there's, arguments over blame and stuff for kids' struggles. So just wanted to kind of drop that into this conversation. Take it where you want or drop it, that's fine. But
so, Andrew, I have a question about that. Were the comments about the behavior of the children and managing that, or was it more conflicts over things that staffing issues are creating? My reason for the question is, like, last week, I wasn't participating in any meetings because I was subbing so much. And I had to cancel individual infants each day because I had 2 teachers out. So when that happens, most of the families, I mean, they understand, but it's still a hardship for them. And so I think that that was my question. Is it about things that staffing is actually creating extra burdens on not just the teachers, but also on families because of the choices we have to make? Or is it just in general over how parents are working with their children versus how teachers are working with their children?
My answer would first be that I don't think there's any way to really separate those, because I think that that's a context of like, I'm dependent on you as a business, but I also understand, but also I can't go to work when you do this, right? I think that's part of the context that we can't remove. But these were specifically about, 2-year-olds coming in with, cursing and parents using words like, you're bad, parents yelling at their kids, and how basically, I mean, there was just judgment around that rather than like, wow, they're super stressed and maybe need some help with parenting skills. And also there was like, the kids' behavior is not really a problem, but it's the parents that are really, just the eye roll thing. And like, parents said, I'd really like her to nap less in the afternoon. And the response was very like, don't tell me how to do my job, but it was literally what was said. And I think that, right, like all of this gets exacerbated because everybody's up to their eyeballs in making decisions like the ones you're talking about of like, now what do I, and then from the parent side, now what do? I have to go to work. Right. Or can't, and the impact that's going to have on me and whatever. So anyway, I
do think there's a lot of stress around that. I can tell you just from my perspective, having to make those decisions and choices about, well, who do I cancel today? And, so that the class stays open, but I still only have one teacher for 4 babies. So what 3 babies don't come today? That it's really hard because you try to make those judgments around who might have the most flexibility, like who might have a parent who can stay home, who has a parent working from home. You kind of go through this whole list, and it's at least from my perspective, it's not a judgment of the situation. It's more, I'm trying to make it the least impact as possible, knowing that there's absolutely no way to have no impact. And some families handle the stress of that better than others. I had one particular family, 2 actually, one that was like, well, the state is paying full subsidy for my child to come, but yet you're saying they can't come today. I'm like, yes, and I understand that, but there's like nothing I can do about it. Or I had another family that said, well, what can we do to help so that this doesn't keep happening? Well, I need subs, I need people. And literally that's what I told them. If somebody has, if somebody's working part-time and has certain days they can volunteer to sub if we need them, please do that. So it's just really hard because some of these families, like you said, they need to go to work. So when I contact them, one of the families said to me, I contacted them the night before and said, there's a possibility I may have to cancel attendance tomorrow. I'll let you know first thing in the morning. So at 6:30 in the morning, I'm texting them saying, hey, I really do have to cancel. And responses are kind of like, well, you're telling me the same day. I'm like, well, sometimes yes, because if a teacher's out, and I've warned people all along the way, I may have to do this at times, but yet when it happens, the reality hits people in a different way. And it does put a lot of stress on me and the staff because we don't want to do this, and yet it's the predicament where we find ourselves in because we're only so many people, so I can get where there's, in some situations, I would think there's probably a little bit more stress around that. Like if I was a home provider and me needing to be out meant that, 5 kids can't come today or whatever that is, that's a lot of stress to be carrying. And so I can see where if a parent doesn't react well, that can cause some back and forth feelings. And so it is tricky right now.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thrust of it really is like, I guess I'm bringing that up because of the fact that this is a community-wide initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have, which we do, and have prior COVID, like pre-COVID, that's why I'm saying like this is a long-standing thing. This is
Mm-hmm.
a dynamic that I think it's worth paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Because the least resourced people are going to have the most trouble with those kinds of things.
Yes.
Period. That's how it's going to work. They're
Yeah.
going to have the worst reaction. They're going to have the least ability to
Mm-hmm.
cope.
Exactly.
Right. All of that stuff. They're not going to be the folks who turn to you. I mean, here's where we get into an equity piece. They're not going to be the folks who turn to you and say, "Oh, what can we do?" They're literally trying to get every, molecule of oxygen they can all day.
Yep.
In terms of having your mask on first.
Yeah.
So
I see that a little bit different though. I see that a lot of times the people that are coming from instability can cope better, but it's the systems that are setting them up. I can't tell you how many times the systems, it's not, and they have no control over it. And then it just adds on. It tends to be more the people that have never had to dealt with that are really melting down. But, it's like with the school systems, right? Kids are getting labeled, they're violent, they're inappropriate. We know they've been through trauma because of the pandemic. The teachers have been through it, the systems, the parents, the children. And here we are coming out labeling children and parents, these really derogatory words, or they're not parenting right. Who are we to say who's parenting right? And so many levels. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just a whole across the thing. And Ruth, I hear you about having to take on that burden of saying, you can't bring your child in because we're short-staffed. I mean, my gosh.
It's the worst feeling in the world.
I can imagine. And then we have the parent that says, I've already missed all these days. Or if I'm on subsidy and my kid doesn't go along, so many times, they may be losing that subsidy. That's another whole issue.
So I just had to ask about that. And because I was like, okay, how do we mark attendance for a child's attendance that we canceled? They're not sick, they're not on vacation, and they're not just absent because they wanted to be. Mm-hmm. So what do we do? And so I'm getting multiple answers to that question, mm-hmm. but there is no code for subsidy that says you canceled attendance that day. And that therefore doesn't count against their attendance for maintaining their payment for the week. So there's a lot of things in place right now that just don't function. And that's frustrating as well. Mm-hmm. But I do think that, I feel like in our center, we've been fortunate is that we haven't seen a lot of these really problematic behaviors and worries about things with children, other than children that we see that are having some developmental delays and things like that. I feel really grateful when I hear these things because we have really good relationships with our families. And for the most part, they're very supportive. They just, when push comes to shove and they can't go to work that day, then they're just like, okay, why is this happening? And so for me, it's a chance to educate them a little bit and give them like context. Okay, here's some articles about what's going on with childcare and staffing shortages and all of these things so that they have some awareness, because some families literally just aren't aware that there's a crisis. Even though it's been in the news and everything else, they just really aren't aware of it because they're just trying to get through day after day after day. And so when it hits them, to me, I try to turn that into an opportunity to say, this is what's going on right now in our community and how it's impacting you right now. It's impacting many families. So, it's nice when they do offer, like, what can we do to help? But it's also just a really good chance for them to have a better understanding that it's not just happening to them and it's not just happening in our center. So that's how I'm trying to approach it.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that one thing that this initiative could potentially do is take that burden away from people like you, Ruth, who are working in centers. I mean, it shouldn't be your job to have to mitigate those challenges. And I, even though you're obviously in a position to do so, but I think it's sometimes this frustration is misplaced because, parents will obviously express their frustration at that the person who's standing in front of them, and vice versa for the early educators. But the real frustration should be towards this failure in our system, that we don't have a public response to this challenge that we are currently facing. And so providers take an individual responsibility to provide a public good. Well, what does that mean when the public doesn't support that public good through, greater resources that could reduce those stressors, right? So that's, and I think that's partly what this initiative needs to do, is to begin to change that narrative.
Right. I agree. I think that is, it is a really significant strain on everyone. It's not just my strain, not just what I feel, but my teachers feel it as well, because they're like, oh, I shouldn't come to work today because I'm sick. So, but you don't have enough people. And I'm like, okay, well, you're sick, stay home. Unfortunately, that means I'll cancel some kids, but that's just what has to happen, because if we all get sick, there's a lot of kids going to be staying home. So it's really hard because they feel really guilty every time they have to take off for something. Last week, I had one teacher with a medical emergency and one teacher with a family emergency. What am I going to do? Tell them, I'm sorry you're having an emergency with your child. You need to come to work anyway. But they feel terrible. They hate to do it. They don't like to tell me. And I don't want it to get to a place where they don't tell me things, because I want them to take off when they need to. They need to. That's just the end of the story. But, it is hard. And sometimes I have to justify it to parents and say, look, teachers have to have off sometimes. And I don't have, we all try to cover so that it doesn't impact you. But when we absolutely can't, this is when I need you to have some level of understanding that we've tried everything possible to make it work. So it is a really hard thing. And I tell everyone every day I wake up and wonder how I'm going to manage it today, because I never know what I'm going to be hit with. And it's difficult, but parents, I think, are starting to get an understanding of where we are. They just don't understand, well, why can't you just hire more people? Because there are no people. That's the truth of it. There just aren't. So I do think if there was a way to address it from a system standpoint and get people to understand that we need more people permanently, but we really need people on those days when we don't have enough. Like I told all my families, if you could just volunteer to sub once in a while when you have the availability, or put me in touch with people who you think might have that availability. So I'm just trying to get them to understand and be somewhat involved, because now it's becoming real for them.
I think to Faith's point, there's folks, and just to again bring up this equity piece, because I think this is really important. There's folks for whom the system has always been invisible because it's benefited them, and all of a sudden it's not working, and they're like, "Hey, where is this? Where's this thing I'm used to just being able to get?"
Yeah.
And like Michael said, like the person who's right in front of you delivering that message is going to take the brunt of it. And there's folks for whom the system has only ever been a source of difficulty and challenge.
Yeah.
And so, and that the person in front of them is seen as a functionary of that system, right? So so I think that this is, I mean, this is honestly like a lot of this is frankly community building too. Like we're, not only are we all part of the systems that impact us, but like we can change them. Like we're making them as we go. We can't change them all at once, unfortunately, but you know, we are part of them, living, breathing part of them.
And I think that there are a couple of different things that I want to bring to this conversation. And one is, one of our main goals for this group is to address equity, you know, equity of access, but also, you know, for this, I think it's equity among programs, because Ruth, what you are describing, I, as a large center with more resources, I'm not at that point that I have to do those things. So how do we change the system so that there's equity, you know, in those ways too, as far as, you know, who can attract the staff and who has enough staff to cover for those days. You know, when I have, you know, staff enough that I can afford to have, you know, we have 3 or 4 people out today. But we can still have our entire, you know, we don't have to ask families not to come. So how do we create that equity, you know, among programs as well? And then the other thing, you know, to go back to Amy's point earlier, when she brought up about this is broader than just our field. You know, I know coming from the Dartmouth perspective that Dartmouth College has, you know, well over 200 positions open at this point, and gets in between 20 to 30 applications a day that spread over that more than 200 openings. So it's more than just childcare, you know, in early ed that has that, you know, and we see that, you know, as an institution here as well. So it's, you know, so of that small percentage of people who are applying, how do we get them to want to go into, you know, early ed? You know, if we have that few people applying for positions, how do we get them, you know, to want to come into this field? So, you know, those were the 2 things I wanted to talk about.
So I have 2 things to kind of piggyback to that a little bit. One is there was a model that I read in the paper, and I can't remember what county it was, but there was a community in Vermont where centers were sharing staff. So the larger centers, on days when they didn't have a staff member working, that person was potentially available to sub for another center. That was a really interesting model to me. It would be hard in our area because, you know, my center and the other center, like in our town, like we're the larger of them. And, you know, it's not super large. So we don't really, none of us have extra staff right now and we're all staffing more than we would like to for hours for each person. But it's a really interesting model of how to maybe address some of this issue. The other thing is the whole idea of how do we get people to go into the field. What's really hard to me is I talked to one parent who's not working, babysits and nannies at times, you know, kind of here and there, but said, you know, like she's willing to come and sub. So I'm going to go through that process with her. But I was willing to hire her. She doesn't have a job right now. I was willing to hire her, but she's not sure she would want to do it for various reasons. One is financially, it's not an attractive thing to do. That's a big one. And secondly, she was like not sure, like whether or not her heart was in teaching, right? And so my answer to her was, well, why don't you come and sub a bit and see if that's where your heart leads you, you know? So I think there's openings and then there's challenges. And we all know that the financial piece of it is a big challenge in attracting people. If somebody doesn't really want to work with children, it's very hard to convince them to even think about it because they know they're not going to make anything if they do it. So that's something that I think is a bigger problem that needs to be addressed. And I know the states are working on it in their own ways. But how you overcome that in the meantime is what I'm struggling with, is how do you find ways of addressing it?
So and maybe somebody can remind me, because I don't know exactly where things stand, but it was my understanding that Vermont passed legislation to invest, and I want to say it was 6 million or so into the workforce through bonuses, hiring bonuses, that kind of thing. Yeah, did that pass, and is that beginning to roll out? So Ruth, can you, if you're looking for someone to hire, can you now offer them a bonus?
No, not right now. It did pass. What I understand is that, and I might be wrong, that it's passed both the House and the Senate, but I think it's like in the second part of that now, because it was built into the budget for the whole state for the year. So I think that's not finalized yet, but I did get emails recently that said they're coming to the end of that process. They believe it's passed, and that they're working on what will be the delivery method. So they're kind of at the piece of like, how will we do this? How will we get the money? The last time the state gave bonuses like that was right in December of 2020. And when they did that, it came as like, we filled out a sheet that said, this is how many teachers and other types of staff. And at that time, they only did it for people who were directly working with children. So people who were like doing the financial piece or the cleaning or any of that, they weren't eligible. This time they're supposed to be eligible. But we had to fill out a sheet that said, these are who our people are. This is like their date of hire, and this is their job title. And then they transferred those funds to us to disperse. So, but we're not quite there yet with the second round of them. So right now, I do have bonuses that we're paying for retention. And if I have a new person, they would be eligible depending on, we're doing it quarterly, but we're doing it out of the ARPA funds, the grant that we got through ARPA. So we set aside a certain portion of that to do retention bonuses. But even that, I know it sounds like a lot, but it's not. So it's like $100 a month. By the time that comes to you in your pay,
that doesn't sound like a lot.
It's not a lot. So what we did is we're at least doing it quarterly, so they get one paycheck where there's like a decent size difference that they notice. But it's just, yeah, it's hard. That's not like something that's going to attract anybody. Can
I jump in into the question that was asked to me? All right, so
sorry.
I kind of have a unique look at this because I used to be an administrator of a school that had 30 early educators on staff in another state, and I can say even before COVID, in a state that had a lot more lenient rules on who can teach in a classroom and be alone with children, it was still so hard to staff rooms. And I still know there were days where I had to close our center because there really just wasn't staff. This is the lowest return degree out there for financially. Like if you get an early ed education degree, that's the degree you're going to get the lowest amount back on. And in Vermont, we're telling people we're asking for things like bachelor's degrees and whatnot. And it's, why would you do that when you could go into regular education for, and have insurance and all those things. So I think there is just that gigantic struggle that we're trying to answer right now in that recruitment of how do we push people in this field instead of just saying, well, it makes you feel so great because that doesn't pay your bills. And so what Ruth is saying, I'm hearing echoed all over. There are centers that are closed rooms right now and they've been closed for months just because they can't find the teachers. It's really being echoed that the workforce just isn't out there right now.
I mean, we've been fortunate that it really hasn't hit us. We've been able to cover things until this past week, but the only way that I could make it fair is to like rotate it among families, right? Because even though it's a hardship, I feel like I want our families to understand that they're sharing in that hardship, that we're not like, I started out with a plan of, well, I'll assign certain teachers, certain children. So if that teacher's out, then those children would be out. But we have certain teachers who have more of a potential to have to be out because they have kids and things like that. So that really wasn't fair. So what I did is, okay, well, if this was going to happen all week, I'm going to rotate it so that everybody gets a day, you know. And I do know from talking to other directors that when they've had to like close a classroom for a week or whatever, you know, the parents in that classroom feel singled out in a way, like, why didn't anybody else have a disruption? So I'm really trying to mitigate that as much as possible, but there's only so much that we can do. So I just pray for everybody to stay really, really well and not be sick.
It also gets tricky with the bonuses or your pay, unless you bump up really well. People that are on subsidy are going to fall off the cliff because they're not going to get enough to support themselves. But you know, they're better off staying on subsidy unless it's bumped. I mean, talking about for everybody, unless it's bumped up well enough. I mean, really, in the Upper Valley, you have to make about $20 an hour just to survive. That's just basics. And forget about if you have children. So $20 an hour with no education just to survive is, you know, really, there's only a few places that are paying that. So it's really, I mean, it gets really tricky for everybody, unfortunately.
It touches everything. So the other thing that's come up with me recently is, you know, I have two teachers one who needs to move out of where they're renting because literally they were like inches away from closing the building down because it failed all the inspections. Then I have another one who where they're renting, they're renting like a duplex, and the owner has just had it assessed for value and has a family member that she wants to move in there, and she doesn't know if she's going to get kicked out of her apartment, or her place of living. So it touches everything when you have those kinds of things happening, and they've been looking for places for months and months and months, and there just is nothing that they can afford. So I think there's a lot of big things that are just coming to a head right now.
The things that we're talking about right now are making me, so I'm wondering what actions we might take as a work group, or what plans for actions that we already started this might be connected to, because I do think this is a big, huge recruitment and retention issue. And what keeps coming to mind for me is like messaging. And I'm thinking of that, you know, that idea that we've talked about before of like somehow reaching out to folks who have left the field and compensating them to get their feedback on why they left, what they loved about it, what it would take to get them back, some kind of a survey like that. I mean, the information from something like that could be used to put out for recruitment. It could be used to build some kind of mentoring system. It could be used for advocacy. It could be like, this is where my brain is going. So just kind of throwing that out. You know, we're shifting the agenda here because we are a smaller group. So I don't want to have a deeper conversation about knowledge and assumptions and things at that level. So if, focusing on our plans is what we can do. So that's,
yeah.
You put
and I don't think anybody from the inventory subgroup, I don't think anybody's here to give us an update on how that's going. So,
right.
Yeah.
Can you put that link in the chat so we can grab it really quickly? I guess one other thing as a being done, the ECEA's director retreat is actually working on family relationships, and we've been trying to have this retreat for a year and a half. It's slated for June. We've been working with Sam Drazen from Changing Perspectives, and we met the other day with this exact kind of issue in mind and concern in mind, that what do we do with those feelings? Like, how do we shift to rebuilding those relationships and talking to our staff about that? That's going to be the focus of our retreat. So I think we're kind of right on track for that. And we have some great guidance from Sam to be working on that. He has some amazing interactive ideas that we'll be doing. So just that we had seen this before, obviously, because we've been planning this retreat since 2020. So it should have happened in the spring of 2020. So it's still relevant, and even more so than ever. So so I just wanted to bring attention to a couple things in the chat. One, I think Rachel put in there about strengthening families. That seems to be weaving its way throughout everything. If you're not familiar with strengthening families, you can let us know, because that's something that we can get you access to very quickly. And then, of course, bridges out of poverty. One of the prerequisites we were doing to leading up to our retreat is that everybody did the 2-hour kind of a bridge version of bridges out of poverty when we were supposed to have it last year. So we're working on setting up a few more of those. We don't know if everybody will take it, but we are promoting that, as well as that kind of lens shifting. And then the other thing, Sunny, you put in is that New Hampshire finally is going to be launching those promotional videos, commercials, actually 8 different 30 and 60-second spots promoting the industry, including everything from traditional childcare to Head Start and after school as a source of valuable employment. In each spot, there's a vanity URL, bringing them back to the jobs board, and then they've added a live phone number. So we'll see how that works. Does it say in the email? Can you forward that email to me? I just looked at mine and didn't see it. I'm just curious if they had a place to put where you could see that, like if they're going to put it on the website. Hi, Sarah.
Do we know who put those together, Sunny?
Oh, you're muted.
Sponsored by the Boys and Girls Club, of America, and it's going through DHHS in New Hampshire, Connections. That's where the job board is located, is on the New Hampshire Connections website. A lot of those things, they're all great things that are going on. A lot of them are Southern New Hampshire oriented, and we get forgotten in the conversations and the planning. Whether that's just because there's more population there and we don't reach out to become part of it, or if I don't know what the reasoning is, but so staying aware of those things is helpful, I think.
I was on that committee with Chris Emond, who's the director at Boys and Girls Club. And I was able to read through the script with a couple other people. I have my notes and everything, Sonny. we made some tweaks to the scripts, but I didn't get a final before it went to the producer because the production company only had a window of so much time, and it just kind of happened before we could, you know, you can only review it so many times. But I haven't seen the finished product. So, and we did argue for more funding to not get the midnight slot on WMUR and not the 3 a.m. slots that came at a discounted rate, that we wanted to have actual like daytime, evening, like during the news, or morning during the weather forecast, to get something out there. So hopefully that's where it lands. To the work plans. The recruitment work plan is in the chat if you click for the Google Doc. And this is not the time, if I'm correct, Andrew, where we're going to be working on, we're going to just look at the actual steps that we have. We're going to have that other conversation at another time. Yeah.
Yeah, let's dig into concrete specifics.
Okay.
What are we going to do and how are we going to do it?
You have control of the, I don't know if we want to do the screen together and kind of build.
Yeah, I can type notes in there. That's what I've been doing, is just typing notes in the work plans when we were so
one, we have, I don't think any of those people are here.
Are you starting in recruitment?
Recruitment.
Okay.
The action step was inventory Vermont, New Hampshire workforce development supports. And we don't, Carrie, Allison, Sharon, Amelia, not here. Let's see. Second one was to investigate workforce development bills. And I think what we know about those bills is that they are not quite, they're not quite there yet. I know in New Hampshire, the Senate bill did pass the Senate and was moved on to the House. I can't remember the day, what day it was, where they have to do the, where they walk the bills over or whatever, but I think crossover day or something. Was it last week? I think it was just, I think it just happened. So, but the language was much deeper. And I know that the group that was working on the New Hampshire bill was the New Hampshire Child Care Advisory Team Council. And I had talked to Marianne Barter a little bit about what they were going to be asking. And I think that the one thing they were really wanting to make sure stayed is that it became a permanent piece of legislation and became a budget, like it stayed in the budget. It wasn't a 1 year, might have been 1 year funded through ARPA, but not a 1 year effort, that it became a budget item. And there didn't actually seem to be any issue with that. They just wanted to build it to, they wanted more clarity. And I haven't seen the final version of that. I think the other piece that's not on here that I'm keeping my eye on is this year is actually our licensing renewal year in New Hampshire, where we do our licensing rules, where we begin the process, and there were a lot of ridiculous rules in there. And so ELN, Early Learning New Hampshire, did bring a group together to, they called it a book club, and they got together and they pulled it apart, pulled the new licensing regs apart, and thank you, worked on which licensing rules they were going to address as priority. For example, one of them is that they were, I believe it was bark mulch. It was going to be no more bark mulch. You're going to have to replace it with pea stone. Just out of the blue, they had decided that was going to happen with no real, we couldn't find a federal rule that matched that. So with it, without being a federal rule, if it is a federal rule that follows the funding for the child development block grant, so the rules have to be follow that money. If it's a state rule or a state legislation or piece of the rules, they can play with it. They can get rid of it. So that was kind of the issue the last time we had a rule revision, is they didn't know which were state and which were federal. But I think there's, I think that at least the provider representation is much better prepared for this rule revision than the last. So I feel like we're in good hands with that group. I'm not on that committee. It was meeting during a time I couldn't meet, but they've addressed all of those things. The best time to address it is with licensing before it goes to the Joint Legislative Committee for Administrative Rules. So that they're trying to kind of come to some negotiations before it goes there, and then deal with the ones that are not negotiable with licensing at the Joint Legislative Committee.
And so, it actually goes, I think it actually goes on April 15th.
It's very close, yeah.
Let's see if I can find the date. On April 15th, it will go in front of the Joint Legislative Committee. So they have proposed the final draft already and put that forward.
So how often do they go through this review process? Do either of you know, or any of you?
5 years. I think they're
every 5 years.
I think they're mandated for every 7 years, and they do it more often. But this time they did it much sooner than necessary, okay. Because there were so many issues with the last version.
And given that the crisis, at least as we see it and are defining it, is workforce related, are there any proposed, I mean, do you guys know if there are any proposed rule changes that directly speak to sort of workforce requirements? I mean, because the pea stone mulch is interesting, but it's really secondary to workforce, right?
The one change that they made, and that has actually already been made, that was voted on before the licensing changes, was the eligibility to be an associate teacher. Mm-hmm. What's the requirements are for that. That was actually already changed before in a special vote. So that is in this next revision. And it just makes it a little easier for people to be qualified to be an associate teacher and have alternate routes of qualification. I think that was the biggest change in that way. Amy, what did you think?
I saw nothing for staffing, and actually centers weren't asking for staff. Some of the rules, like, I know that Keystone doesn't sound like a big idea, but one of the centers was like, it was going to cost them like 45 grand to change it and to come in. I mean, we're compliance freaks. Like, they go down each rule. And so that kind of kicked them in the face, and you can't even pay. It's almost like you can't even see your staffing issue when you're reading rule revisions like that. It was just very overwhelming to try to do things like that. I mean, there are a lot of little nitpicking things in the rules. And I think for a lot of providers too, it's just kind of like reading the rules is different than it was even 2 rule revisions ago, where it tells you exactly how many minutes they can watch a device and how many minutes they can be in a container. Do they call it, Sunny, or something like that?
No, they don't call it restrictive device.
Restrictive. So
like a high chair or something.
Yeah. Or a bouncy, or a play pen. They call them some people refer as containing them. So you can't leave them at the table for 45 minutes after they're done eating. And a lot of people take offense to that. And they're like, why do we have to have a rule on that? But those aren't the ones that we're necessarily really kicking back on. It's the ones that are very costly.
Right.
And we're not even able to move forward on really good workforce support in a rule revision at all.
So in Vermont, what I do know is like they revise things, it seems, every year is how it kind of works. They're in the middle of putting together the group and revising regulations right now. The one thing that I would agree about is what they did for making associate teacher levels. They said, oh, we're going back to the rules that were in place in 2016 before the new regulations that really kind of impacted everybody came out in 2017. So what that meant was, instead of having 7 college courses completed towards that, you only had to have 4. So that helps. It really does help. But like, I put in a question, and I brought this up before, about hiring staff for summer and trying to get some kind of clarity on, okay, you're saying that if somebody's in high school and they're 15 years old, this is what the regulation says, they can work as a trainee in your center. Okay, that's great. But then they added the part that says, but only if they're in an approved human services program. Okay, well, that means the kids that are planning for college, you can't hire them. I want to hire them. It's my question.
And also they've cut back the human service programs in the regional high schools. So you don't have that opportunity.
Right. And on top of that, when they're 15, like, I have somebody to hire. One of my teachers, their daughter wants to work here this summer. She's 15. They're not even old enough to declare a program.
Right. And they've never been anything less than junior year in high school, only junior and senior year in high school, where the programs ever existed.
The regulation itself is very contradictory. So I asked licensing, can I apply for a variance to do this and hire this person so that I can have more kids in the summer than I normally do? And what I was told is, well, nobody's ever applied for a variance for that. Okay, so what does that mean? So then they talked to their supervisor and came back and said, oh, we might have to look at this because we had 4 other people call and ask about this. No kidding, because we can't hire people. And here's this whole pool of, high school kids who could help out. And what the regulation says is that we can't hire them because they're not in a human services track. So they said they're going to work on what might make this possible. How hard is that? Honestly, you just look at the rule. And just like you said, we're going back to 2016 for what makes a teacher associate. Okay, you look at the rule and go, okay, we're going to suspend the human service requirement. That's not that complicated. So I asked like weeks ago and have heard nothing. So that's the kind of thing that they really could make easier, and it would help in the summer at least. And it would help for a lot of centers and programs, because a lot of times you have trouble filling staff at the last part of the day, because if you have teachers with young children, they leave when school gets out. So you need people at the end of the day, and those high school kids could work. They're going to go work at a store. They go work at the Woodstock Inn. They go work other places. They could come and work for me. So those kinds of things that I think, like, how do we advocate for very simple rule changes that aren't going to necessarily impact quality of care, because those kids have to take the same orientation as everybody else. They need to learn mandatory reporter training. So it's all the same things that we would have an adult do, right, that was over 18. But if the rule says we can hire 15-year-olds, why do we have this restriction on which 15-year-olds I can hire? So those kinds of things, when they're looking at these regulations, it would just be nice if, in this time where we're in a crisis, that there could be a little bit quicker process to how to address very simple things that would increase our applicant pool.
So, you know, I hadn't really thought about rule revisions as part of our workforce development or our advocacy piece, but it seems like somewhere that we need something, because I know for a fact that in New Hampshire, and it sounds like in Vermont, anything that happens is organic. Like it has to be an uprising of people that have the time and the capacity to review the rules, to work with licensing, to know the process, to get ahead of it. In the past, we've had rule revisions in New Hampshire as a provider. We listen, we go to the, you know, informational hearing. We write down, like you're saying, we write our questions and nothing ever happens. Nothing has ever happened. Nothing's ever changed. And the only way to do that was the last rule revision is we showed up at our legislative committee hearing in droves and knocked it off of its feet, which is why Sunny said they're doing another rule. Like we completely knocked it off of its feet at the last one. But that has to be an organic, you know, kind of drive, because there is no representation. So VAC doesn't take on rule revisions apparently, or VCEC. Anyway, the Alliance or the advocacy group in Vermont is not doing it. So, you know, I think that you're right. I think you're exactly right, Ruth, is that we need to look especially at workforce right now, and like put the piece down, somebody's handling that. So can we take the workforce pieces out of licensing and figure out what we can tweak or clarify so that, it makes it easier for workforce. I don't know where
could this group start by, since this work group is focused on recruitment and retention, could we start by having a few people from this work group, some of whom may not be sitting on this Zoom call right now, go through, like, take their fine-tooth comb through the regulations, come up with some recommendations. So we have a statement, like a unified statement from this group saying, here are recommendations we have. And then as a group, as an initiative, we could figure out whether that goes under program models or advocacy or all of it, or right.
And
like
if
we start with our expertise around recruitment and retention, fill in some, you know, suggestions, recommendations for expertise that isn't being requested, but is available.
Yeah, I mean, there are simple things in the regulations that could be tweaked, maybe not permanently. Maybe some things could be permanent, but maybe in this time that we're in, you know, you think about little things like what's required to be a substitute. The last revisions they did in Vermont, thank goodness, they took out the requirement for the 15 hours of professional development for subs every year, because honestly, that was one thing where I did have subs who kind of went, and I have to take classes and do 15 hours to just come and help out for a couple hours. And they weren't willing to like do that. That's a commitment level they weren't willing to have. So they took that out, and I was very grateful. But there are simple things like that we could go through. And me being somebody who like lives in and breathes in those regulations on a regular basis, I would love to go through and say, okay, this is great. Can we make this a little easier somehow? There's got to be
so
ways
in the interests of volunteering other people's time, Ruth, could you do Vermont? And Sunny, could you do New Hampshire?
Yeah, I think it would be, I would want to work with somebody, because my perspective, I think it needs to be multiple people's perspective that's to make
always
recommendation.
Best. Always best.
And you know, I'd be happy to go through and pull out what could relate to, you know, recruitment and retention, and not necessarily put any judgment on it. Just, you know, other things have popped up while I was sitting here thinking and listening to Ruth. You know, that was one thing that is changing in this new New Hampshire licensing rules too, is that substitutes no longer have to do professional development. And high school and college students are no longer required to, you know, also. And
that is not in ours.
And yeah,
so if they're
another
a trainee, they have to still do it.
One thing that really does impact us or is going to impact us is that people who are hired can't even be in the program until they've gotten through the background check piece of it. And they have up to 45 days to get us the background check information. So you can't hire someone and say, oh, well, maybe in 45 days, I can get you started. So, so it's things like that. So I'd be happy to go through and just pull out everything that could be related and without judgment of just, this is what's related.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy to look through and see what things might be. And then the couple other directors that I do know well enough to say, hey, could you look at and see what things might jump out at you as what would make your life easier? I think that's a good place to start, because even if we come up with ideas to get more applicants or get more people willing to work, you have certain things that restricts that. So I have somebody says, yes, I want to be sub. Okay, well, but I might not be able to use them for more than 45 days. So that's a big one.
I'm wondering too, if I should try to engage a couple of family providers for their perspective on the rules as well. So we have a family childcare network meeting. Well, it won't be until the 1st, but I think we might be able to get them to look specifically at workforce related rules. So I'll see if I can get that.
Yeah, I think it would be great if we start the way that Sunny said, where just any that directly impact recruitment and retention. And then we can go through and refine, okay, well, how does it and what would we recommend instead? We can build up from there.
Okay, so Andrea, you added number 3, a new number 3. And then if there's nothing else on that, we could go to number 4. Are there 2? Oh, because you haven't changed them yet. The next one, which is develop marketing plan for general public, gather and share on social media national ECE workforce recruitment articles. This is more of the message. I don't know if we need to do some of the other work before this.
I think so. It sounds like we want to gather information. I mean, another piece is we could kind of insert that idea of conducting some kind of survey of, former ECE providers and staff members, and, develop a list of questions that we would like their feedback on, and decide how to compensate them for that time and that work, and use what we get from that. That could be part of that. I did want to just mention that Kristen from Dartmouth Hitchcock, she had just moved into her position when these work groups began. She was feeling a little bit overwhelmed. I know that her name was next to the marketing plan. So she's trying to decide how she can be involved with the work groups at this time. And she said that there was somebody else at Dartmouth she might be able to identify that might be a great fit from Chad. So just to name that, and change the work plan to reflect that. But yeah, because number 4, the way that we have number 4 right now we're developing a marketing plan for the general public. I mean, that's pretty enormous. So we could start with a smaller step that is relevant.
Okay. The new number 5, need to clarify, research innovative staffing solutions regarding short-term and long-term solutions, subpools, examples of business involvement initiatives and programs. we didn't get very far in that one. Success. Is that where the examples of success came in?
I think the examples of success had to do with other sectors that have successfully managed recruitment and retention issues, and see if there were any that we could apply to this sector of the workforce.
Well, that's why I brought up that whole like staff sharing model that's being done in one area of Vermont. Like, that's a really great idea. I don't know if there's a way to do that, or I don't even know how they went about it, but it happened. But I think it came up between like 2 or 3 centers or providers that started to talk about, okay, well, there are some days when I might have staff that aren't scheduled, or they're only scheduled in part of the day, but maybe they're available to work the other part of the day for you. So I just don't know how we look at whether or not that's a model that's working well and how it might work. That was just one idea but I'm sure there's got to be some other models going on that we're just maybe not aware of.
Christina D'Alessandro and I are going to set up a meeting with Wayne. Michael, I can't pronounce his last name.
Yeah.
Christina is hot on the trail with that. It really matches what we've been talking about every single day. And she is also working on is it JVS equivalent for the Upper Valley?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it would be interesting to know if there are any workforce development nonprofits that currently operate in the Upper Valley. Or does anybody know of anything?
Other than in-house in Dartmouth Hitchcock, they have a workforce development team inside Dartmouth Hitchcock.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking more that does broad community-wide, workforce development kind of programming. And maybe it doesn't exist, but,
there's the Small Business Development Center, but that's not workforce development per se.
Yeah.
Maybe that's if there needs to be one.
Well, for this workforce, particularly, yeah, I mean, just building the capacity and some expertise around people who know how to recruit into fields, right? And they recruit into various fields and then provide specific, entry-level training to get people up and running, some of which you are trying to put in place, Amy. So I guess part of the question I have around this is, to what extent does the current work that the ECEA is doing in terms of building some apprenticeship models and beginning to build a pipeline into the field, what parts of that could be scaled, and is there, and do you have capacity to do that if you had resources to do it? I guess those are the kinds of questions that I would have.
Good questions.
Christina and I were really wondering, and talking with Wayne, the questions are around that. Like, what do they do? What is it that they do? What is the expertise that they bring to workforce development that work? And then of course, like, how are they bringing in those very particular skills about early childhood into that workforce development? So that's kind of what we want to see. We want to see how it all works, how that all works together, because they seem to have a system for outreach. They have a system where they connect with new Americans. Actually, when I was looking at the report, of course, Boston, but still they had these connections that we would not, if there's somebody already doing this, and they have systems in place. We should just be tapping that. That's our
yeah.
wonder.
I can't see JVS doing recruitment for early educators in the Upper Valley, though.
No,
Yeah.
we weren't thinking like for them to come here. What we wanted to see is what are the parts of them that are needed to make them, and then who fits that description up here. Where would it naturally kind of work, or is there already something that we can build with in the Upper Valley? So that's kind of where we are. We just want to know what parts what we don't know. We want to know what we don't know.
Yeah.
That I'm wondering actually if that might be another specific ask we could put out to our business partners and corporate council folks that we've lost quite a few of over the past couple of weeks is, what are the tricks of the trade in terms of recruitment? Can you kind of consult in on that? Because that is a very that's a refined set of skills. And I'm wondering if, some of it could be transferable to this workforce. It reminds me of a conversation I had a little while ago with a colleague of mine about, there's all these terrible IT systems that we use in social services. And wouldn't it be wonderful if there were some IT folks who, it takes them a couple of hours to make something amazing. Wouldn't it be great if we could cross those pools a little bit? It's kind of the same thing.
So I had just Googled really quickly and found a workforce development report from 2019 for the Upper Valley, done for the Sunapee region. And they actually have a little map with the tech centers of 2019. And just some of the other programs that are out there just to be aware of. I haven't actually read it, I was just perusing it. Yeah, so I think we'll go to Wayne first, kind of ask our questions, probably have more questions, and then think about the Upper Valley and what pieces are missing and take the next step. But that would be the scale, that's scale.
Can you tell me where, I don't know who Wayne is, where is he from?
He's based in Boston. He is running a pilot to create a workforce pipeline into early education and care. And it's a partnership initiative with JBS Boston, which is like the largest workforce development nonprofit in New England, I believe. And then partnerships with Bunker Hill Community College. So they kind of get people into the pipeline, they get all the credentials they're needed through the community college, but they get all their sort of recruitment and soft skills training through JVS, and then direct placement through partnerships with actual ECE centers. So it's a big undertaking.
It would be great to have like a program like what they offer at like vocational rehab, where somebody goes in and they help you pay for what you need, but you may get training right on the job, but you're still getting paid. They take up that burden of that. So, and during that time that you're waiting for the background check for you folks, it would be like, they may be able to take their classes or whatever, but they're still getting paid. There's so many different programs. So it's a safety net for them, but it's a safety net for you folks that are in childcare. And it's done remarkable work in other fields. So something, on a smaller level, maybe what you're talking about in Boston, but that way people would take that risk.
I love that idea about Voc Rehab. My experience with Voc Rehab in Vermont is a little bit more limited, but I came from Maryland, which of course is a very different system for everything. But what they had in Voc Rehab there were they had identified certain occupations. And then when people came in, they would try to assess their skills. And if they had skills that said, oh, I like to work with children or whatever, they had whichever one of those programs they had running, they just funneled those people to those programs to give them the training. And that linked to the rest of the community. I don't know. So both my daughter and my son have interacted with Voc Rehab in Vermont, and nothing like that has been recommended to them. It would be really nice if there was something like that.
Now, Voc Rehab in Vermont doesn't actually run its own program. So they would be funneling people into other things. And I think you're really all familiar in Vermont with everything that already exists.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hugely missing Allison's voice today.
Mm-hmm.
I think Allison might have a lot of wisdom about this. So
I know that in Vermont, Voc Rehab helps people finding jobs and helps them go into training in other places. But I wonder if that's not something that could be addressed in how they do that, and how do they funnel people? How do they help them with obtaining the skills to be able to find jobs in an area that's meaningful to them? I know my daughter's working with them right now, and she really needs something like that. She needs that kind of, okay, you're going to come here, you're going to do your orientation, you're going to do this, and then we'll help you find the job. It would be nice if something like that existed and that it had an early childhood focus.
In the interest of time, because people have got to jump off, I'm seeing that in the chat. Andrew, I could talk with you apart from this meeting. I had spoken with Clay Adams, who is the president and CEO of Mascoma Bank, and also the chair of the corporate council, about this issue about the business participation in this initiative. And he had talked about some particular people at different companies who he would recommend reaching out to, and he's also willing to help do that outreach if we need. But it would fit in perfectly with this specific kind of ask about recruitment. And some of the people that he's named would be the exact right people in those companies to ask that question of. So I could talk with you apart from this and maybe work. That might be the thing that I could do to be helpful to this group.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's anything else. I do need to go. I have a meeting about a grant, and
yeah, me too. Did any op-eds get published last week? Just curious. I don't know if I saw anything.
The op-ed did not. There were 2 letters to the editor that did from parents. So David, and then I don't remember the name of the other parent, Sunny.
Case.
Oh, okay. So both of those parent letters were published? Yeah, yep. Great.
So that's a question. Those things that are being published, and maybe I missed this because I know I wasn't in the meeting last time around. Do we have some sort of repository for the links or saved documents of those things that we can point parents to? So like the parent that I had to, when I'm trying to explain to them why these things are happening, would be really great to be able to say, if you're interested in understanding the nature of the issues that we're facing right now, here's where you could access that.
So I am in the process right now.
Individual papers and things.
I am in the process right now of putting together a Teams platform for this initiative to use. So that will be a place to go. But in lieu of that, anybody can post the letters on the listserv that folks are subscribed to. The op-ed is posted. The op-ed from the steering committee is posted on the Vital Communities website. But those letters to the editor could go. I mean, they could be put up on the listserv.
Okay.
So
I find it very helpful because parents are very scattered with what they're trying to handle right now, to just say to them, here's a link to the one place you can find 10 different things that'll explain. or that'll help.
And they're both in a parent's voice,
okay.
which is huge.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for shifting gears, and we were very productive in shifting gears. So great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.